Hello everyone, today we are going to discuss boundary setting for leaders, and I'm going to start this off with perhaps a somewhat surprising story. I'm going to talk about my friend. I'm going to call him Jay, and Jay is an alcoholic. Now Jay is one of my closest friends. I love him. He is probably the single most loyal friend I've ever had, but when Jay starts drinking, it's one of those situations where it's not just that it removes some of his inhibitions, he actually becomes a different person. He does things that are often very harmful, very inappropriate. He doesn't remember what he did. And when he really starts drinking too much, the different Jays start talking to each other. And they have these different voices and they get in arguments with each other. It's quite disturbing. Most people cannot handle it. I can handle it. I really don't want to. So finally, after he did something really stupid, I just had to tell him, I said, Jay, I don't hang out with you when you drink. All right. That's an example of setting a boundary. In simplest terms, setting boundaries can be defined like this. I am 100% responsible for my relationship to any person. I am 100% responsible for my relationship to any goal, idea, value, problem, addiction. I am 0% responsible for anyone's relationship to anyone else. In fact, most of the time, it's not even any of my business. And if I attempt to manipulate or control two people's relationship to each other, it's going to blow up in my face every single time. Furthermore, I am also 0% responsible for anyone's relationship to their own values, goals, problems, addictions. So for instance, going back to my good friend Jay, notice, I didn't get together with a bunch of his friends and talk behind his back and say, hey guys, we need to set up an intervention for Jay over here. I didn't threaten Jay. I didn't say, well, if you don't stop drinking, I'm going to whatever. I said, I don't hang out with you when you drink. None of this, if you do this, then I'm going to do something else garbage. That's setting a boundary. And of course, a big part of that boundary involves saying no to Jay. We're going to get to that in just a second. But first, I want to talk about something that I think is important. I think most of us have learned through life experience that it's really not a good idea to try to control people's relationship with each other, right? But at the same time, I think a lot of us do things fairly consistently that involve trying to control the way people relate to each other, and we don't quite realize that we're doing it. So the way I'm going to say it is it's like this. If you decide to become a Navy SEAL, right, or a firefighter, there's things you give up. There's things that everybody else can do, but you can't really do those things. If you decide to become a leader, there's things you have to give up that are sort of normal for everybody else. You have to give up gossiping, blaming, complaining, venting, criticizing someone when they're not present and you're talking to somebody else. Because see, when you're doing those things, when you're gossiping with somebody about a person who's not there, what's actually happening, whether you realize it or not, is you're trying to control those two people's relationships with each other. And it's going to blow up in your face every single time. But it's worse than that. If you want to be an effective leader, you also have to stop other people from complaining to you, from gossiping to you. Even if they're not trying to manipulate you, and they are. But even if they're not trying to manipulate you, the issue is that there's the process of allowing this to happen. As a leader, you're saying this is okay. It's okay to it's okay to talk about other people when they're not present. That's not okay. It's not going to work. And speaking of the sort of things that of having to give up, right? Of having to give up stuff. When it comes to saying no, a whole lot of us have been raised to be people pleasers, right? Or we've been raised to, almost everybody I think has done this before, where you sort of compromise before you've even had the conversation. Like you're trying to get into somebody's head and figure out, you're trying to reason for somebody, you're trying to figure out how somebody thinks. You have an idea, let's say, and there's a group, and you come to the group and you give them, but instead of saying the idea that you really believe in, right? Instead, what you do is you compromise beforehand. You're like, oh, what I'm about to say, that might bother these people over here, or oh, that might offend these people over here. I better change it before I actually say it. Yeah, see, there's a lot of stuff going on there. The fear of rejection, the fear of offending people. But the thing is that all of this involves you crossing boundaries if that's what you're doing. What you have to do instead is you have to say what you really think. Then you got to shut up and listen. And yes, a big part of listening is closing your mouth. You've got to listen to what other people say instead of compromising before even hearing their position. And you've got to really pay attention to what they're saying. And if they say no to you, well, that's fine. They say no. Because here's the thing about boundaries. If you want to say no, that's a good enough reason to say no. If you want to leave, that's a good enough reason to leave. That's what it means to take 100% responsibility for your relationship to other people or to goals, values, and ideas. If you want to say no, that's a good enough reason to say no. And you don't even owe someone an explanation unless you promised one or you're contractually obligated to provide one. But see, here's the gig. That means that it's the same for everybody else. If everybody else wants to say no, that's a good enough reason to say no too. So since such a big part of setting boundaries comes down to saying no, let's talk just a little bit about saying no. Remember my good friend Jay? See, here's the deal. When I say, I will not hang out with you when you drink, am I saying no to him? Well, eventually I am when he drinks and he wants to hang out with me. Yeah, I'm saying no. And yeah, that hurts. It's rejection. Nobody likes to get rejected. But see, here's the first thing about saying no. I'm going to bring up 3 things. Number 1, either I can say no to Jay's drinking or I can say no to Jay. Because if I keep trying to hang out with him when he drinks, eventually he's going to do something that makes me so angry, it's going to destroy our friendship. And so that's the thing about setting boundaries. You can either say no to people's behaviors or some of their ideas or whatever, or you can deal with all the built-up resentment and anger and stress that eventually causes you to have to say no to the entire relationship. Here's the second thing about saying no. Sometimes a genuine no can lead to a genuine yes, but fake yeses never lead to a genuine yes. So let's bring up again that example of when you make the mistake of sort of compromising before you've ever even had the conversation. You know, if I state my idea and then you say no to it and then you state your idea, oftentimes when we say no to each other in a very clear, genuine way, it leads us to have to be creative and think up a new idea that's better than either of our original ideas was. That's one way that saying a genuine no can lead to a genuine yes. Furthermore, even if we go through the process of compromising, right, it's still the case that if both of us at the end of actually saying what we think and actually listening to each other, if at the end of speaking and listening and really paying attention to the other person so that everybody feels heard, whatever compromise we come to, we're genuinely saying yes to that compromise. But if we're just doing this sort of fake yes stuff all the time, that never leads to a real yes. What it leads to is burnout. People just get tired when they're constantly hearing a fake yes and constantly having to say a fake yes. So that's the second thing about saying no. Now here's the third thing about saying no. The third thing about saying no is, just like it hurts to get rejected, people are empathetic. And guess what? They can tell when you're giving a fake yes. And it's uncomfortable. And not only will you become resentful when you give a fake yes, but quite often, the people you're working with will become resentful when you give a fake yes, because they can tell. And now they're annoyed with you. Now you've built up expectations that you don't really completely fulfill, and everybody just sort of becomes unhappy. In a lot of ways, there's nothing worse than trying to hang out with somebody who doesn't really want to be there. So those are the 3 things that I hope you keep in mind when it comes to saying no. Because for most people, the hardest part of learning to take 100% responsibility for the things you need to take responsibility for is that it means having to say no a lot. When I started taking complete responsibility for my relationship to other people and to goals, values, and ideas, I found that I was saying no over 80% of the time. The other thing I found was that every single person I had to say no to, our relationship became stronger afterwards. But a big part of that is because I always listened. So this is how I'm going to finish this little video on boundary setting for leaders. As a leader, you've got to stay connected to everybody. In fact, in some ways, leadership itself can be defined as clear self-definition through boundaries, while at the same time staying connected to everybody in the organization, everybody that you lead. This is a tough balancing act, and I don't think anybody ever gets it 100% right. But it's the goal. And the simplest thing to focus on when you're trying to reach that goal is to focus on listening to other people. Most people will be a lot happier if they are genuinely heard by you, and if they feel like they're genuinely heard, than they will by trying to win an argument where you just sort of give a fake yes. So that's the key. The key is, if you want to say no, that's a good enough reason to say no. If you want to say yes, that's a good enough reason to say yes. And say yes. If you genuinely don't know, you got to say, I don't know. You've got to tell the truth. You've got to be who you are, but at the same time, try as hard as you can to listen to everyone and to stay connected with everyone. That's boundary setting for leaders.